Okay, so what we didn't do, I guess, a lot of this morning is to really just talk about money and what is money. And while there were some references to accounting and blips on a screen and button pushing and so forth, we didn't really distinguish what we're talking about in modern money theory from what most of the textbooks describe and what our students end up getting taught in most economics programs across the globe. When you open up an economics textbook and you turn to the page that begins to talk about money, inevitably you find a story that begins with something about barter. And once upon a time, man trucked his wares to the local trading venue because he's pre-programmed to truck, barter, and exchange, as Adam Smith told us, and there was no currency around. So you had to lug your clay pots and your shoes and your fish and whatever else you may have specialized in the production of down to some local trading venue where the only way the exchange could take place is if you happened to come upon the person who not only had what you wanted, but wanted what you had. Economists refer to that as the double coincidence of wants. And so barter is this clumsy system for conducting exchange, and so the story goes, man suddenly decided, hey, there must be a better way to organize. We should really think about finding something that would be universally accepted. And lo and behold, they hit on money, primitive forms of money first. The textbooks tell stories of things like pebbles and shells and feathers and beads and all of that, and later discovering money things like precious metals, okay, which had nice properties that fish and other commodity monies didn't have, in that they would serve as a good store of value. They were easily divisible, they were portable, you put your coins in your pocket and go conduct your exchange. Okay, but the story is always told that this somehow happens spontaneously. The private sector figures out that there is a more efficient way to conduct exchange. They choose to use money. They decide what money is. And this all happens without imposition from any authority, no state, nothing like that. Okay, so the money is stateless. And then, of course, over time, money evolves, I'm still in the textbook story, from things like primitive money to gold and then to paper with gold backing. People take paper in exchange for real goods and services, and the argument is, well, but at the end of the day, it's as good as gold. So they continue to accept the paper. Well, then the story gets more difficult to explain for this group. Sometimes we call them the metalists. Because when you have a pure fiat money system, why do people accept currency that is intrinsically worthless, backed by nothing of value, and yet people will beg, borrow, steal, toil away the day in order to get these otherwise worthless pieces of paper? And so what we like, what we prefer, is the story that's been dubbed, or the approach that's been dubbed modern money theory, which traces the nature and origin of money to the early authorities. Randy has written a lot about this in his Understanding Modern Money book, from the early temples and later to the nation states, and we could go on and on about this, but that's not what I want to do. But it does trace the origin and nature of money to some power authority. That is, the money does not emerge spontaneously by the will of the people, but it is imposed on them. How is it imposed on them? It is dictated by the authority. It is chosen. The authority establishes that you all must pay something to me. I defined the unit of account. In the United States, the unit of account is the dollar. So I say, in what unit you must pay obligations to me, and then I tell you what you have to do to eliminate those debts. And so I impose a tax liability on you. I make you indebted to me. Now you need to do something to eliminate your obligation to me. And I tell you how you can do that. In the United States, you can earn dollars. You pay your tax obligation to the state in US dollars. That gives value to the government's otherwise worthless pieces of paper and allows them to move real resources from the private to the public domain. Okay, so we have a very clear way to answer the question, why is fiat money accepted? Whereas our textbook counterparts have some difficulty with that. If you push them too hard, they say, well, Pavlina accepts dollars from me when I go into her shop because she knows that she can pay Warren her rent with those dollars. And then you say, well, why does Warren take them? Well, Warren knows that he can pay Marshall when he rents a car from him. Well, why does Marshall take? Well, Marshall knows that Randy will take them. And we'll get into this infinite regress problem. They really have no answer is the problem in that theory. So the modern money approach accepts that the value of the currency derives its value from the state's willingness to accept it in payment to the state, to eliminate obligations to the state. Now, there are lots of things that obviously circulate as money things. The government's money is not the only thing out there. There is some ordering or hierarchy of money things. Some are more generally accepted than others. And so here I have a quote from James Tobin, just to give this some credibility, because we pull out the Nobel Prize winner when we want to convince you that these ideas are not crazy and fringe. And James Tobin said in a book in 1998, in advanced societies, the central government is in a strong position to make certain assets generally acceptable media by its willingness to accept a designated asset in settlement of taxes and other obligations. The government makes that asset acceptable to any who have such obligations, and in turn to them and to others, and so on. So Pavlina takes it because she has obligations to the state. If she herself doesn't, she knows she can find someone who does. That's why this thing is special. That's why the government's IOU is special. And those of us that have done some work in this area and talking about a hierarchy of money would argue that the reason that the state's IOUs, state money, sits at the top of the hierarchy is because it is the most generally accepted, and it gains its acceptability by virtue of the state's proclamation that we all need it in order to eliminate our tax liabilities. So modern money theory stresses the relationship between the government's ability to make and enforce tax laws on the one hand, and its power to create or destroy money by fiat on the other. I would define as a sovereign government a government that retains these powers. Okay, they are sovereign in their own currencies. Among others, examples of governments with sovereign currencies, the United States, Canada, the UK, Japan, Australia, all sovereign in this regard by this definition. So the question then becomes, for a sovereign government, how much can it spend? Can it afford Social Security, Medicare, tax cuts? Is the current path sustainable? Isn't inflation going to be a problem? Will we bankrupt our children and grandchildren? What if the foreigners decide they don't want to hold our bonds? Okay, I'm only going to answer a couple of those questions in this talk because many of those are designed to be answered by other panelists later today. So